Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Vice President and Chief Accreditation Officer of AACSB International, Stephanie Bryant.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you've joined us to hear about the final version of the proposed 2020 Business Accreditation Standards and how they've turned out. We are really proud of this collective work of our membership, and we hope that you are as excited as we are. I'm joined today by Nancy Begranoff and Jeff Perry, and they are the co-chairs of the Business Accreditation Task Force, or the BATF, as you have come to know them over these last 18 months or so. The task force did meet quite a lot over this last time period, in whole or in part about 19 times, and they delivered presentations all over the world, and they listened really, really carefully to what you wanted in your standards. Our goal was to create standards that are reflective of the future of business education, and I think that we did exactly that. So today what we're going to do is take you through the final proposed business standards. We'll talk to you a little bit about how these standards are going to be adopted, and please pay attention to that part because it's really important. We're not together, we can't vote in person, so there's a special process that we've created to be able to get these standards approved, and I'll tell you about that at the end of this presentation. We'll also have time for Q&A, so just because we're not together doesn't mean you can't ask questions, and so we want you to be able to do that. So you have a little bit of evidence here of all the different places that we've been to listen to you and talk to you. And we've also been in front of all of AACSB's operating committees, our board of directors, just lots and lots of people have put time and heart into these standards. And so we hope you're as pleased as we are. So our goals for the new standards were many. So I'll just give you a few of them at the top level. We wanted, first of all, to streamline the standards, and that means to eliminate any redundancy. We wanted to provide some structure to the standards so that they hung together very nicely, group standards a little bit better together, and I think you'll be pleased with the way that turned out. Importantly, these standards move us towards a principles-based and outcome-focused set of standards. So that's very different from the standards that we've been using, which are much more focused on inputs and quality of inputs. We still have some of that, but you'll see a much more principles-based focus in this set of standards. We also wanted them to be more globally oriented, and you'll see that throughout with the language that we use, the examples we use. I think you'll feel that we are truly living out the global nature of our organization in this set of standards. Importantly, we wanted schools to have more flexibility. So they are standards, and we do have certain ratios and things like that, but we also wanted to give you flexibility in places where it made sense to give that flexibility so you can be innovative and you can try new things. And we think that's a really important part of being an AACSB accredited school. Not everything we do works out, but we want you to try things. And last but not least, you'll see that these standards integrate a theme of positive societal impact. And so we want these standards to really promote the idea of business as a force for good in society. The standards are designed to operationalize what we spelled out in our collective vision for business education 5 years ago. And you can see on this slide, there are 5 areas that we said we thought business schools of the future should really demonstrate. And we use that as a foundation for creating these standards. And you'll see these ideas: hubs of lifelong learning, leadership, co-creators of knowledge, catalysts for innovation, and of course, global prosperity, woven throughout the standards and every part of the standards. Imagine the collective power of all of our 874 currently accredited schools working together to tackle society's grand challenges. And that's what we're all about. So we're very excited about that. So there are 9 standards in our new 2020 proposed standards, and they're divided into 3 categories. The first category is strategic management and innovation, and there are 3 standards within that first set. The second set is called learner success, and you'll see that we're using the word learner, not student, throughout this set of standards, again, to be more forward-looking. There are 4 standards within learner success. And the last category is thought leadership, engagement, and societal impact. And there are 2 standards in that area. So I'm going to start by giving you the highlights of standards 1 through 3 within strategic management and innovation. And then I'll turn it over to Nancy, and Nancy will tell you about learner success and what we've changed there. And then Jeff will tell you about thought leadership, engagement, and societal impact. Because our membership has seen 2 exposure drafts already and given quite a lot of comment on the exposure drafts, we actually had over 300 comments on the exposure drafts, read every one, looked at everyone, considered everyone very carefully. There's been a lot of exposure of these standards. And so we're going to primarily focus on areas of difference between the 2013 and 2020 standards. So let's get started. I'll start with strategic management and innovation. We know that strategy is a very important part of any AACSB accredited school. And so the 3 standards here really go to having a strategic plan and how you manage your resources to make sure that your strategic plan carries out the mission and your intended outcomes. So in standard 1, it's about your strategic plan itself and your strategic planning. So we do expect you to have a well-documented strategic plan. So we want to see that when your peer review team comes to visit, they're going to ask you to look at that. We want that to be developed through a very robust and collaborative planning process that involves key stakeholders, both internal and external. So we want to see that. We want to know that lots of people had input into your plan. We also want to know that you're using the plan. So it's not just on a shelf, it's actually being used to help monitor how well you're doing. And are you meeting your strategies and your expected outcomes? We want to know that you're communicating your process to key stakeholders. And then importantly, this is new in 1.2 of Standard 1, we're asking schools to conduct a formal risk analysis and tell us how you plan to deal with any risks that might possibly be on the horizon. 1.3 has to do with innovation, and we want to see that you're inculcating innovation as a key element of continuous improvement. And Nancy will talk a little bit more about that. And then we want to see in your strategic plan, we'd like you to tell us how do you plan to demonstrate a commitment to positive societal impact. And that needs to be consistent with your mission, not everybody else's mission, but your mission. So that can be local, that can be bigger than local, regional, international, but we want to know that you're planning to have an impact on society through your AACSB accredited business school. Standard 2 has to do with resources. And I would say these are sort of your non-human resources, your physical, virtual, and financial resources. And you'll see that Standard 3 is then the human resources. So Standard 2 expects the school to manage your physical, your virtual, and your financial resources so that you can promote a high-quality environment that fosters success of all participants in support of your mission. So we're looking there at your business school, the facilities of your business school, both physical facilities. We're also looking to see what sort of infrastructure you have. For example, do you have internet connectivity? Are people able to use electronic databases? Do students have the types of things they need to prepare them for success in the workplace? And then, of course, your financial resources, we want to make sure that whatever it is you would like to achieve and what you lay out as your major strategic initiatives, that you have an idea of where that money is going to come from, where will those resources come from. And so there's a table that we ask you to show us that. And then Standard 3. Now, Standard 3 is interesting because it's really an amalgamation of 4 standards that existed in the 2013 standards. And we thought those 4 standards really hung together better as one standard. And so you'll see in Standard 3, it's divided into 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4, and each of those corresponds to a standard from the 2013 standards. And so here you can see streamlining and bringing ideas together that hang together better. So 3.1 is our faculty sufficiency. And so we do expect that you have sufficient participating and supporting faculty. And that is not changed from 2013, and the ratios around that are not changed. So that one is one that you will be very familiar with. We expect also the 2x2 matrix that was introduced in the 2013 standards with the SAPA, SP, and IP designations or categories of faculty. That also has been carried over from 2013. So those should be very familiar to all of our AACSB accredited schools. We did make some adjustments to some of the definitions within and some of the expectations, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So, and then interestingly, people really did not like the idea of the other category, and so we've renamed other to additional faculty. 3.3 has to do with professional staff, and we know that it takes a lot of professional staff to run a business school. So that's career people, that's advisors, it might be library support, it's all the people that it takes to make your business school function. We want to make sure that you have enough people to do that. We don't say that those individuals have to reside within the business school. They can be centralized at the university level, but they must be available resources to the business school. And then the last part of this has to do with having well-documented and well-communicated processes to manage, develop, and support your faculty and professional staff over the progression of their careers. So for your faculty, what are you doing to help your new faculty get onboarded, to make sure they're supported and they have what they need to be successful? And likewise, how are you helping your professional staff to be successful? So that's the standard. What are some of the implications of the standard? Well, some of the changes here really arose from us listening to the membership. The membership told us very clearly that you like the 2x2. You weren't unhappy with the 4 categories, other than you wanted a change in the other classification, but you wanted a little bit more flexibility around it. So for the scholarly academic, you'll see, for example, in the 2020 standards, we broadened the definition of terminally qualified to refer to other types of terminal degrees. So a JD who is teaching business law and who is conducting research and producing intellectual contributions in law could be SA, as a matter of fact. And then we give other examples likewise. With the ratios, always a lot of interest in the ratios. What did you do there? Well, we removed the 60% SAPA plus SP expectation, and we did leave in place the 40% expectation for SA, and the overall SAPA, SP plus IP should be 90%. And that means that no more than 10% of your faculty can be additional faculty. Now, one thing we did change is in the 2013 standards, people typically reported these ratios by organizational structure. And so typically that was by department. The problem with that is that departments can be organized in lots of ways that are often not strategically organized, but they're that way administratively. So we thought that really wasn't a good representation of the underlying intellectual capital that the business school brings to bear to offer degrees in an area. And so in this version of the standards, you'll see that the default reporting unit for Standard 3 is discipline. And that's true also for Standard 8, where you'll see intellectual contributions. So discipline is the default reporting unit. Now, we did not define the disciplines, and that's because there's a great variety around the world. Again, in the interest of being a principles-based system, we want you to be free to define the disciplines as fit your school, your missions, and very importantly, the degrees that you offer. So for example, let's say that you offer a degree in accounting and finance, and that's the name of the degree. Well, then it would make sense for you to have a discipline called accounting and finance. But if your accounting degrees are separate and your finance degrees are separate, and you have other degrees under those areas, you're probably going to have a discipline of accounting and a discipline of finance. So you will get to define the disciplines, and they will depend on what types of degrees and where the degrees, how the degrees hang together. So we will let you do that. Faculty will be reported in the discipline in which they teach, and if you have faculty that teach in more than one discipline, and that's not all that uncommon, you would report them in both areas. So maybe they're 50% in accounting and 50% in finance. That's consistent with how we do it today. The ratios are met at the discipline level, and so your SA percentages, for example, are not by degree program. They are met at the discipline level, and that is a very important change with this set of standards. So before, you would have to meet the ratios at the org structure level, not anymore, that this would be at the discipline level. So again, that's in the spirit of being more principles-based, more flexible, but not less rigorous. We also, in this set of standards, importantly, are allowing schools to have more flexibility with how they deploy faculty. So we want to recognize that deployment of faculty is a strategic choice of the school, and we do not mandate certain percentages by programs. So related to this, we will expect you to provide a narrative that helps the peer review team understand what your strategies are around deploying faculty. So you have to have a strategy for how you do it, and we do expect that there's an appropriate blend of faculty. So for example, if you put on a regional campus, you decided, oh, it's a regional campus, we'll put all IP faculty on all of our regional campuses, that probably would not fly with your peer review team and would not be in the spirit of this standard. So there has to be an underlying strategy around high quality for how you deploy your faculty. And that goes for within programs, within locations, and within modalities. Importantly, we'll be looking at your outcomes. So how are your learners doing? How are they performing? And we'll look at your assurance of learning to kind of give us an idea of that. We did carry over the deployment table, and that table was 15.2 in the 2013 standards. It's table 3.2 in this set of standards, and we did carry that over. We contemplated not carrying it over because people tend to then think you have to meet the standard, the ratios in that table, and that is not our intent. But we did carry it over to facilitate a discussion between the school and the peer review team on deployment strategies. But again, it is not the intent of the standard to apply the ratios to that deployment table. Okay, so as you get ready to have peer review visits, you'll want to make sure and communicate with your peer review teams. Make sure they understand how you're deploying faculty, why you're deploying them in the way you are, and you want to show that you have high quality outcomes. In areas or disciplines where you have research master's degrees, you have doctoral programs and higher level programs, we would expect a higher percentage than your 40%. 40% is sort of your baseline, and then it kind of goes up from there depending on the level of degrees that you offer. Consistent with the 2013 standards, PRTs can request faculty qualifications and AOL by location and modality if they have concerns about the quality that's being offered in a particular modality or location. It's not required on its face, but a peer review team could ask you for that. We did put some pictures of the tables in here. You can peruse those, and the green squares will show you where the differences are. Just designed to highlight this table, 3.1 should look very familiar, but you'll see it says by discipline, not by org structure. You'll see also there's a place for specialty field, and that information will be over in the interpretive guidance that will release after the standards are adopted. But that is where you'll tell us a little bit more specifically within the discipline what people are teaching. There's also a place for you to indicate if you offer degrees in this area or don't offer degrees in this area. So we recognize that there are a lot of faculty who support other areas. Maybe they're part of your business core, but they do not support a degree program in and of themselves. So if you have some business law faculty, for example, that are important in the core, and every student must take business law, but you don't offer a degree in business law, you could show law as a discipline, and you would check the box here that says, we don't offer degrees in this area. Why do you want to do that? Because that tells your peer review team that you're not going to be expected to meet the ratios in that area. So in disciplines in which you do not offer degrees, you would not be expected to meet the ratios. And then you can see the additional faculty area. So again, we're just kind of showing you that you need to meet the ratios at the discipline level where you have degrees in the area, and then you'll have also an overall global across all business programs test where you'll show us your numbers there and your ratios there. Table 3.2 looks just like 15.2 because it is the same table, so no difference there. Again, just focusing on this is part of a conversation you have with your peer review team so they can understand how you deploy faculty. So that is standards 1 through 3. And now what I'd like to do is turn it over to Nancy and ask her to talk with you a little bit about standards 4 through 7 on learner success.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm going to walk us through standards 4 through 7 on learner success. Before I do that, I want to note I will be looking down from time to time at my notes to make sure that I don't leave anything out. I also want to clarify some terminology. The first term is learner. You note that these standards are called learner success and not student success. Learners more actively learn, whereas students study. So we've decided that term is more modern and more active, and we would use it here. The other term that we're using is competency versus learning goals. So you'll see competency goals throughout. Now this has created some discussion because in some parts of the world, or for some individuals, the word competency is a bit narrower than a learning goal. However, we provide in these standards a set of operational definitions. So you'll see that we provide for competency the definition that competency specifies intellectual and behavioral capabilities, which include knowledge, skills, and abilities. So it's actually meant to be a very broad term. Okay, with that, let me talk about the first standard in this set, and that's standard 4 on curriculum. Part 1 of standard 4, 4.1, addresses curricular content. The curricular content should prepare learners for business careers and develop a lifelong learning mindset. There's a broader set of competencies that we include here rather than in the 2013 standards, which got much more into the weeds and specifications about what curricular content would include. Here, the competencies are meant just to be accounting, economics, finance, management, MIS, marketing, and quantitative methods. So we've talked about a very high level of discipline. We had at one point created a taxonomy that was very specific, but feedback told us that that was a bit too much specificity, and you didn't want us to do that because then we were leaving something out or including something else, and you thought that it was better that we leave that at a high level, and so we have done so. Now, at degree level, the competencies or the curricular content is meant to be a bit different. So as you might imagine, for a specialized master's degree, you would expect to see a deep dive into the discipline that that particular master's degree is representing. And then for doctoral degrees, they should have both teaching and research components. Something that's new in these standards is if you have a doctoral program that's preparing a learner for an academic career, then there should be some training in how to be a teacher, right? So they should learn a bit about how to actually instruct and different pedagogies. There's also a research component, so a doctoral program would include research, but there's also a requirement that there is an appreciation of research that contributes positively to society. Societal impact is a big theme of this set of standards. You'll see it addressed in detail in Standard 9, but here we do expect that there should be appreciation of research contributing to society. Another piece of Standard 4.1 is a technological requirement. Now, at one point we were going to have a table here that we required filling out. We took that away, we got feedback on that, but you are expected to document how you use current and emerging technologies in your programs. So for example, if you had a program in data analytics, we would expect to see that there was some software training maybe in data transformation tools or data visualization tools. So current and emerging technologies are expected to be required here in 4.1. 4.2 addresses curriculum management. This is about governance. How is curriculum developed? How is curriculum changed? And the governance should encourage innovation. 4.3 has program elements, and there are several of these. The first one is innovation, a theme throughout the standards, and an important theme for AACSB for business education. Innovation here can be demonstrated with respect to curricular content, the pedagogy, or the delivery method. So you have the opportunity to explain how your school has been innovative in all those different ways. We do know that many schools have gotten very quickly innovative as they responded to this pandemic. Experiential learning is another piece of this 4.3, and experiential learning here may include study abroad, internships, all kinds of opportunities that students have to get out of the classroom. And lifelong learning mindset is yet another program element. Now, we got feedback when we originally called this lifelong learning and said, prepare your students or your learners to be lifelong learners. That's hard to do. We think it's easier to show that you have helped to develop a lifelong learning mindset in your learners. And you can do that in a number of different ways by showing the assignments that are given that go beyond the classroom, for example. The fourth piece of 4.3 is positive societal impact. So again, Jeff will be addressing in Standard 9 societal impact at large, but here we're talking about curricular content that is creating societal impact. And so, for example, your finance class may have a component on ESG investing. You might offer a sustainability course. You might have your students go out and perform VITA, voluntary income tax assistance. There are many ways that your curriculum might provide societal impact, and this part of the standard gives you the opportunity to tell that story. Forgive me for being so enthusiastic about these standards, but I think this is an exciting thing for us to be able to do. Look at our programs and see what we're doing. You might be surprised that you're doing more than you thought. Standard 4.4, the last piece, is about engagement, and it specifies that the learners should be engaging with the faculty member who is responsible for the course. That takes us to Standard 5. So now I'll move on to the Standard 5, which is on assurance of learning. So that's something that's very familiar to you, I know. 5.1 is about processes. And here we do have something quite different from the 2013 standards. In 2013 and previous standards, we focused quite a bit on direct measures of assurance of learning. In this standard set, 5.1 allows for indirect measures as well. In fact, it says that the school's processes should include direct and indirect measures. And this is across the entire portfolio of programs. So it's based on your mission and strategy, the proportion that you would have. It may be that for some programs, you only have direct measures. That might be the case for your undergraduate program, for example. It might be the case that you have a specialized master's program, maybe a Master of Science in Taxation. And that might rely mostly or solely on indirect measures, such as alumni surveys or interactions that you have with the practice. So we think that this is going to provide a lot more flexibility to you in assurance of learning. Feedback that we got told us that in many cases, indirect measures were more important in determining the curriculum than the direct measures. For those schools, however, that have a very robust set of direct measures for assurance of learning, rest assured, this new set of standards is not meant to be burdensome. So if you have already created the wheel, we don't expect you to reinvent it. But normally, we would expect that there would be a mixture of indirect and direct measures across your portfolio of programs. New degree programs in the standard are given time to develop their processes. Well, they should have a process in place, but to actually show the feedback loop on assurance of learning. And then there is a table provided here, table 5.1. Again, we have gotten feedback from you. Some schools told us that it would be burdensome for them when they had a really robust set of direct measures of assurance of learning and they had a good documentation process in place. They didn't want to have to transfer and transform that documentation into a table format. So for schools that are in continuous review, it's optional to complete table 5-1. If you're in the initial accreditation phase, however, it's required. And we do believe that this table is actually going to be a bit of a shortcut or an easier way for you to document and describe the assurance of learning you have in place. So we're not going to add the burden for you, but we are going to give you the opportunity. The last piece of 5.1 is that faculty should be engaged in assurance of learning, and this is not new. Assurance of learning is not meant to be vested in just one sole individual in your school who's in charge of it, but rather it should be something embraced by the faculty at large. 5.2 is about degree equivalency, and it shouldn't matter what location or delivery mode being used. The education should be the same in quality. 5.3 addresses micro-learning, and this is something that's new and increasingly important for schools. As you develop these micro-learning credentials and small pieces and certificates in your programs, there should be some quality assurance and continuous improvement review in place, so we expect to see some process about that. However, if those micro-learning pieces are stacked into a degree program, as with any degree program, those are deemed in scope. The last piece of this standard on assurance of learning addresses executive education, and it really is the same as with micro-learning, that we want to see that there are processes in place to ensure quality and continuous improvement. And for this executive education requirement, that is when executive education revenues exceed 5% of the school's resources. So that's it for the assurance of learning standard, and let me move on now to standard 6, which is learner progression. And this takes us from the time that a student is admitted, a learner is admitted. I have trouble with my terminology too. From the time the learner is admitted to your school to graduation and actually beyond. These standards are very concerned with outcomes, so we want to know how they're doing when they leave you. Starting with admissions, as you might expect, admissions should be fair and they should be transparent. If you're admitting to a graduate program, there is an expectation that a learner will first have obtained a bachelor's degree. Any exceptions to that need to be noted. There's also the handling of transfer credit addressed in this piece of the standard. Now, students who are getting transfer credit coming into your program, we would expect that the courses that they're transferring in should be at the same level of quality as the courses that you're offering. So we're looking to see that there are processes in place to ensure that. Then there is a piece of this standard that says that most learning in business courses should be from the institution that's giving the degree. If you're putting your name on that degree, then we would expect, the standard expects, that most of the coursework should come from your school in business. Now, that doesn't include general education or some of the outside coursework that's being done. But in business education, you're giving them a business degree with your name on it, should be from your school for the most part. There should also be support given to learners as they progress. So you admit them, they come into your programs, they're going through traveling towards graduation. There should be support processes in place to ensure that they're doing well. And for those students or learners who are struggling a bit, there should be some extra things in place. Maybe there's tutoring available for them, or an academic skills support center, something that shows that you're paying attention to those students who are struggling and giving them that remedial attention that they might need. And then students coming into a business school, they do think of it as a professional school, so they expect in their outcomes that they will go on to wonderful graduate schools or into careers. There should be career development support. It might be in your school or it might be centralized at the university, but there should be career development support in place, and the standard does require that documentation. The next part of the learner progression standard, and there are just two parts to this standard, is about program quality and post-graduation success. Again, these standards are very outcomes oriented. So if they're outcomes oriented, we want to make sure that there are good outcomes. And this requires some documentation of post-graduation success. And we know that schools vary in how they do that. Many schools track their learners or their graduates very carefully. So there might be a graduate survey. Where are you going to work, or what's your outcome? But there also might be surveys of alums. How are they doing? Other schools aren't able to quite keep track of them as well, because maybe you have all international students, and once they leave you, it's difficult to track them down. Nonetheless, there is a requirement that there be some documentation, some assurance of postgraduate success beyond anecdotal evidence. So that takes us to the last standard in this section, which is Standard 7 on teaching effectiveness and impact. 4 parts to the standard as well. 7.1 is about the evaluation of teaching. And here the specification is that there are multi-measures for evaluation of teaching, not just a reliance on the student evaluation instrument, the SEI, but rather there are multiple ways that the school is able to ensure that teaching is evaluated appropriately. 7.2 is about supporting teaching effectiveness. How does the school support your teachers in their development and their learning? You know, something that's very important these days is we talk about inclusive pedagogy. Does your school put on seminars on unconscious bias or inclusive pedagogy and help your faculty to acquire those skills and that knowledge? This is also across delivery modes. So we know that several schools had to quickly jump into remote learning this semester. How did the school support that and help the faculty to be able to do that? The next piece of the standard is on faculty preparedness. So how do the faculty keep up to speed in their discipline and in the current pedagogies? Faculty may be attending meetings of their professional associations. Hopefully they are. They might be journal editors. They might be on editorial boards. There are many ways that they might be showing and demonstrating that they are actually prepared and knowledgeable and current in their discipline and in current pedagogies. And then the last piece of this standard is on teaching impact. And we know that the most impact that we have is ensuring that our learners are successful and that they're satisfied with the education that we've provided. That's the most important thing we can do and most impactful. But there are other ways that you can demonstrate that your teachers are having impact. They may do so through the scholarship of teaching and learning. They might do so by being mentors to other faculty. Maybe they have a blog on teaching, or they share their materials, their syllabi with other schools. This standard gives you the opportunity to show how your faculty are having teaching impact beyond your institution perhaps, and beyond their particular classroom. So that's standards 4 through 7. Standard 4, curricular content. Standard 5, assurance of learning. Standard 6 on learner progression, and Standard 7 on teaching effectiveness and impact. And with that, I will turn this over to Jeff Perry, who will take you through Standards 8 and 9. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy, and welcome to everyone from wherever you are around the globe. It's my pleasure to be with you here today. Note from time to time I will glance down because I have some notes in front of me that I'm using throughout this presentation. The third section of the standards is thought leadership, engagement, and societal impact. The two standards in this section emphasize that quality business schools make a significant difference to business and broader society through their research and other engagement activities with external stakeholders. Standard 8, Impact of Scholarship, has three main parts. The first part, 8.1, states that schools will produce quality, impactful intellectual contributions. Schools will have systems and processes through which they produce quality intellectual contributions which align with their mission, and they will have a 5-year portfolio to demonstrate this. The types of intellectual contributions that a school produces is driven by its mission. For example, if a school has a mission that focuses on having an impact on local or regional practitioners, it is likely that white papers will predominate in their intellectual contributions. On the other hand, if a school has a mission which is about creating and advancing knowledge, then it is more likely that peer-reviewed journal articles will predominate in their portfolio. In the 2020 standards, it is not required that peer-reviewed journal articles predominate in all schools. As I said, it depends on the mission, but all schools will have peer-reviewed journal articles in their portfolio of intellectual contributions. Schools are also required to have policies that guard against publishing articles in predatory journals. 8.2 states that schools will demonstrate thought leadership through their research. Schools identify an area or areas in which they have this thought leadership. Now, these areas could be content areas, for example, strategic management or consumer behavior or data analytics. Or they could be activity areas. For example, the school might publish an academic journal, or they might publish case studies, or they might bring together quality conferences of academics and practitioners. So in this part of the standard, schools are required to identify their area or areas of thought leadership, what their aspirations are in that area, what they've achieved in the last 5 years, and what their goals are for the next 5 years. 8.3 states that through the school's intellectual contributions, it will be having a positive impact on society. So schools are required to identify exemplars of research from within their portfolio that demonstrates this impact on society. Table 8.1 is similar to Table 2.1 from the 2013 standards. However, there are some notable differences. If you look at the columns that show types of intellectual contribution, there are only 3 in Table 8.1. First is peer-reviewed journal articles. The second is other peer-reviewed and editorial-reviewed intellectual contributions. And the third is other intellectual contributions. In part B of the table, which covers how the portfolio of research aligns with the mission, you'll see that schools are encouraged to talk about the contribution of units within the school, for example, research institutes or research centres, as well as the contributions of individual faculty. And in part D, which covers the impact of intellectual contributions, you'll see in D2, there is room for school to identify the research exemplars that show societal impact. Standard 9, engagement and societal impact. This is the new standard, and we are very excited about this standard. The standard reflects the vision of AACSB, transforming business education for global prosperity. It also responds to the overwhelming response we had from you, our members, that a quality business school has and should have a positive impact upon society. In Standard 1, the strategy standard, schools identify the goals they have for having a positive societal impact. In Standard 4, the curriculum standard, they identify where in the curriculum students learn about the impact of business upon society and where there might be opportunities for students to engage in activities that will have a positive impact on society. And in Standard 8, the research impact on society of a school is identified. So in Standard 9, the societal impact of the school and its students is identified, and it covers all of the activities of the school except research, of course, which is covered in Standard 8. Now, it's understood that we have a wide diversity of schools within AACSB. Therefore, some schools will be having a societal impact on a local level, others at a regional or national, international or global level. Each and all of those are completely appropriate. It's also understood that schools will be at different stages of development in terms of the impact that they are having. So schools are required to identify their aspiration, what they've achieved in the last 5 years, and what they're looking to achieve in the next 5 years. We're also asking schools to be explicit about how they assess and measure this impact on society of their activities. This slide identifies the matching of the 2013 standards onto the 2020 standards. If you look at the 2013 standards, you'll see there's a column with blue numbers, and those blue numbers identify the 2020 standard that the 2013 standard maps onto. Just a few points to note. There were 15 standards in 2013. There are only 9 in 2020. The major consolidation is into the 2020 standards 3, 4, and 5. You will also note Standard 9, there is no mapping from the 2013 standards because, of course, Standard 9 is our societal impact standard, and that's our new and exciting standard. At this point, I'd like to hand back to Stephanie, who will take us through the next steps. Thank you.
Let me tell you a little bit about how we're going to get the new standards approved. Ordinarily, we'd be in a room, we would call the question, everyone would raise their hand, and the standards would be approved. But because we can't be together in person, we had to find a workaround for how to be able to get the standards approved as opposed to waiting for a whole year. So we were able to find through Florida law, we're incorporated in the state of Florida, the ability to do what's called written consent. And written consent means that each of the members, each of the accredited schools would be able to indicate that yes, they approve the adoption of the standards through an email. So that's our plan for getting these standards adopted. So the written consent email will be sent out on April 27th. So the organizational rep, usually that's the dean at the accredited school, will receive an email. The email will say, we'd like to invite you to participate and click here to consent now. Click the button that says consent now, and then you'll be taken over. It'll put your signature, you'll type it in, and it's very simple. And so we want you to be able to do that and then indicate that you do approve of the standards. We'll keep track of that, and we do have to have a majority of the Accreditation Council, that's of all the accredited schools, to approve for these standards to be able to be adopted. This period of time will be 90 days. So within 90 days, you'll be able to go in and do this, and you only have to do it one time. But we do have that period of time to allow people plenty of time to do it. I do ask that you do it as soon as you get the email, just so that the sooner we can get the consent, the better it will be, and we can communicate with people. So please respond at your earliest convenience to that. So be looking for that email. Tell your dean to be looking also for that email. So once the standards are approved, we then have a 3-year transition period. And this is traditionally how we do when we adopt new standards. We don't just automatically say everyone now is under the new standards. People need time to prepare for it. So we have a 3-year transition period. This coming year, 2021, would be year 1. And during that year, only a small number of schools would go through. We're anticipating somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 schools. We would work to select those schools, and they would go through at the end of 2021. So you're probably looking at April, May, or June of next year. And we would be able to test the standards and see where there were any disconnects. That's the purpose of having this small controlled pilot. And then when the standards roll out to a bigger group of people in year 2, then we will have anticipated and been able to support our peer review teams in our schools. Year 2 and 3, it's also optional. So if you have a visit during 2021, 2022, and so forth, it would be optional to adopt these standards. You could still go up under 2013 if you choose, but most people, I think, really like the 2020 standards and will want to adopt them. As of 2023, then the standards would be mandatory for all schools, and everyone would be switched over by that time. So that's the process. Again, please be looking for that email to be sent out very soon, within a day of you hearing this message. And we want you to reply as soon as possible. And we're just so thrilled that we could be able to do this for you. Otherwise, we would have to wait a year to do this. And so we're excited to be able to offer this written consent process. Lastly, a huge thank you to our volunteers who serve us tirelessly and who have committed to the high ideals of high quality and continuous improvement, and really a very collegial process. You have made these standards possible. And so I say thank you to all of you. And now we'll meet you over in the question and answer session and be able to answer any questions that you may have. Thanks so much.